Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and today we just finished watching episode 8 of season 3, the finale of season 3 of The Mandalorian, and I have some thoughts. First, I gotta go over some things. Okay, so last week's episode was named The Spies, okay? And something happens that tends to happen in the Star Wars fandom where when an idea gets introduced into the fandom, like a theory or a conspiracy or even just like a thing that seems to make sense to most people, so they kind of just roll with it, including myself, it seems to kind of take over the conversation, and that becomes like what the truth is. And what I mean is, last week's episode was called The Spies, and it became, kind of endearing, I guess, for everyone to kind of think, well, who are the spies that episode is talking about? Because it mentions, it's plural. It's like, okay, Elia Kane was one spy, so there must be a second spy. And a lot of people were like, oh, it's the armorer, or myself, I was like, oh, it's Axe Woves, or, whatever, right? So it was just like this ongoing idea for the last week now that everyone's like, there's going to be another spy, there's going to be a big reveal, someone's going to be a spy. And it wasn't until yesterday that on Twitter I was like, well, what if the fandom got a little too caught up in this whole idea of there being a spy? Because when you actually watch last week's episode, nothing in that episode really indicates that there's going to be another spy. Like no one talks about there being a spy. No one's like secretly whispering to someone off camera or something. You know what I mean? Like nothing really solid indicated that there was going to really be a big reveal of a spy. And sure enough, in this episode, there is no spy. There does not turn out to be someone who was betraying the Mandalorians, the armorer, Axe Woves. Everyone is on the level. Like no one betrays anybody. And so I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, are people going to be disappointed if their big spy thing that they've been holding on to, the armorer being a spy, like, are people going to be upset if that just doesn't happen because there's no spy? And after all, it was just the title of the episode. It wasn't like, it wasn't like in the universe itself they were talking about like who's the spy. It's like that wasn't really a plot line at all. So I thought that was interesting. So I'm curious how people are going to feel because there is no spy. No one betrays anybody. No one was working for anyone else. The armorer and Axe Woves and everyone seemed fine. They were working with Bo-Katan and Din, and everyone's on the level, and it's all cool, So, there's that. Now, let's get into the actual episode itself, and it kind of ties into everything we just talked about. Is like, when we watch these shows, especially like the big finales, we tend to bring in a lot of these, not just expectations that they'll be good, but very specific expectations of what we kind of want to see happen, and I want to say, like, sometimes those are like justified, right? Whereas other times they're more outlandish kind of fanfic ideas of like, oh, but what if this happens and then this person shows up, but then again, this show has done that, right? So it's not as if this show is against giant Luke Skywalker showing up at the last minute to save everyone kind of moment, So I do want to say, this episode played out pretty straightforward. And what I mean by that is, there was not a big twist. There was not a big cameo. There was not a betrayal of any kind. There was not even necessarily a big character death. Everyone was like, oh, Din is gonna die and Bo-Katan's gonna die, and admittedly a lot of this was kind of spurred on by the fact that I think who was it, one of the actors, one of the stunt people who wear the Mandalorian costume, the main character's costume, to do a lot of the stunt work. I think he posted something online where it's like, oh, it's gonna really hurt this last episode, it's gonna really hurt everyone. And right now I'm thinking, well, what does he mean by that? Because unless there was some other ending, everyone lived. Everything worked out. The good guys beat the bad guys, and everything's fine. you know. So, you know, I think a lot of people, including myself, were expecting something a little bit more dramatic, not necessarily something like specific, right? Like, you know, some people thought like, oh, Boba Fett's gonna show up, which that would have been cool. There's not, you know, I guess there are some logical ways you could kind of find a way to put Boba Fett in this last episode somehow, but you know, it would have been cool, but it didn't happen, right? I thought maybe Bo-Katan would die, because I thought like, okay, well, they're setting her up this whole episode, and they mentioned how her song has not been written, like, right, like she hasn't been written into legend yet, and I figure out like, oh, a big heroic death, that's how you get written into legend, right? So like, that's how that would work, but it didn't happen either. And Din definitely didn't die. There was like rumors that Din was gonna die. I thought those were always really silly. That definitely did not happen. He did not get mind wiped. I don't even know where that came from. People were like, he's gonna get mind wiped by the mind flayer. I'm like, why? What are you talking about? Anyways, that was kind of silly. We did get some reveals, right? Like, we got some reveals, right? Which, again, it's like this episode, it's not necessarily that it was anticlimactic. You know, I feel like that's going to be a word that gets thrown around for this episode. But it did feel like there was going to be more dramatic stuff happening, and there wasn't really. You know, like everything played out pretty straightforward. The good guys won. No one betrayed anybody. We're good, I guess. But some of the reveals we got was that we do find out that those clone tanks that Moff Gideon had in his base on Mandalore were clones of himself, and he just straight up says like, yeah, I was gonna clone myself and give myself the Force, and so that's what all the Grogu experiments were for, and that's what that whole deal was. Okay, so he was trying to give himself the Force through his clones, and they end up destroying, I don't know, destroying the tanks, but they at least like they break all the water out of the tanks, and I suppose that kills them. I mean, he says, oh, you smothered them before they could take their first breath. Now, I kept on expecting the end of the episode to like show one of the clones was still alive, and that's still possible, right? It's still possible that that happens, but they did not show that. And again, this is kind of what I mean by like, I kind of expecting something more dramatic of like, oh, one of the clones survived, and that's gonna be like, you know, now we have another Moff Gideon clone, but this time he has the Force, right? But they didn't show that, and it's like, oh man, it felt like they were setting that up to happen, and it didn't happen. So now, while it's still possible that season 4 comes around and we see a Moff Gideon, but this time he has the Force. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't throw like a little stinger, a little hint that might happen. You kind of just indicated that they all died anyways. So, oh, okay. It was a cool idea, I guess. But, you know, at least we got a definitive, you know, they kind of showed this last episode that what Moff Gideon was working on and what Hux and the Project Necromancer is working on, those are two separate projects. So Gideon was not working on a Snoke Palpatine thing. He was working on cloning himself. Again, cool idea. Would have been neat if you showed a stinger or something indicating that one of the clones survived, but they didn't, you know. So it's like, it's possible, but they didn't, you know, maybe. And I guess the other really big thing is that the Darksaber was destroyed. Bo-Katan was fighting him with it, and he ends up grabbing it and crushing it with his, you know, robot armor hand, right? So there you go. That's a big deal. Darksaber is destroyed, but again, no one really seems to bring it up after this. None of the other Mandalorians really seem to care. No one brings up like, oh my god, the symbol of our leadership is destroyed. Like, it doesn't come up at all. You know, just after they, you know, Moff Gideon gets caught in a giant ship explosion, which again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, he was wearing mostly Beskar armor. It's totally possible he survived that. So there's that, right? Like, he was, you know, it feels like if you're covered head to toe in Beskar armor, you might survive fire like that. I don't know. So he's possibly still alive. But, you know, they cut to the Mandalorians on Mandalore, and everyone's just kind of peaceful. Everyone's doing their thing. The cultists are still doing their cult thing near the waters of Mandalore, right? And obviously the other Mandalorians who don't believe in that stuff, they're just They're fine just chilling there on Man, like, you know, so everything seems peaceful. There's no infighting. Everything seems fine. No one really seems to care at all that the Darksaber was destroyed, which to me, it's like, I don't know. I think it's just one of those things where it's like the show told us how important this is, but then you don't do anything with it. And then when it's destroyed, it doesn't seem to mean anything because no one brings it up, you know? So it is one of those things where it's like, okay, I guess maybe they can get someone to help them fix it, right? Like in the Ahsoka show, we know, what's his name? That droid who helps the younglings create their lightsabers. We know he's around, so it's like they could fix it. Will they? I don't actually know, but it's a theory, right? You know, and then and then there is a weird moment where Din wants Grogu to be able to take the oath for, you know, the creed and the whole cult thing, and she's like, well, he's too young to say the words. He can't take the creed. And he's like, well, I need to adopt him. And they do this weird thing where the armor's like, well, his parents are far away. And Din's like, well, I'll adopt him as my own. And I thought that was already the case, right? Like, I thought he was already considered his dad, right? But now I guess it's official. He really is his dad, even though, didn't they say, like, last season, like, you are as his father or something like that? Like, wasn't that like a whole line that the armorer said? But now I guess he's even more his father, like, for real this time, because now Grogu is called Din Grogu. So you have Din Djarin, and now you have Din Grogu. So there you go. That's his name now. You know, and now I kept on expecting them to, like, okay, well, so is he taking the creed? Does he get a little piece of armor or something? But they're calling him. They said he's no longer a foundling. He's now a Mandalorian apprentice. But they didn't make him take the creed, and he didn't get any armor. So, and then they're like, well, you got to take him on his journeys, as your master did for you. What does that actually mean? I don't know. I think that's literally just saying there's going to be another season of this show, and you're going to go on more adventures, so you go do that. Maybe at the very end of the last season, they will have him get some armor. I guess the thing is that he still can't talk. So it's like, all right, you're a Mandalorian apprentice. You're considered a Mandalorian. You're considered this guy's son. But you can't talk. You can't say the creed. So maybe you can't get your armor until you can say the creed, right? Like, I think that's the line they're still trying to draw there. Oh, and the Mythosaur. Another thing that, like, people kept on expecting the Mythosaur to show up or play back into this. The Mythosaur does show back up, as in, like, Grogu can sense the Mythosaur is down there when he looks down into the water. And, you know, it opens its eye, but again, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't show up. Bo-Katan does not ride the Mythosaur. Like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people thought maybe the Mythosaur was going to come in and destroy the Imperial base, but Axe Woves just ends up crashing the ship into the base, and so that's how they get rid of that problem. You know, so it's the Mythosaur is still there. It didn't do anything this episode. I mean, I guess you could say it's more of a symbolic type thing of like, oh yeah, the Mandalorian people will endure. They're gonna survive down there. You know, like this is, you know, like they're still alive, I guess. So we kind of end this in again, it's not that it's necessarily anticlimactic because the action was great. You know, like there were a lot of stakes where I was like, is this where someone's gonna die? Is this where something's gonna happen? I think it was just that there was not a lot of what would you call it, dramatic conclusion of like no one died, no one got betrayed, the good guys won. There wasn't even an after credit scene where like we're kind of hinting towards, you know, Moff Gideon still being alive or a clone still being alive, or maybe they'll show Thrawn at the end. Nothing like that happened. So, you know, like it just kind of, the season wrapped up really neatly. And it was just like, okay, see you next season. Like, oh, all right. Din Djarin does go to a Delphi station, which is, you know, the New Republic little, you know, naval bar, I guess you would call it. And he meets up with Carson Teva, and he's like, hey, you know, this guy's, you know, Grogu's my apprentice now. He's, you know, he's working with me. We're gonna do this. I mean, we kind of already were, but I guess just letting you know. And I want some new jobs, you know, maybe some more specific jobs, not working for pirates. You know, he even says like I'm primarily a bounty hunter, which he hasn't really done any bounty hunting since the Book of Boba Fett. But I guess he's still gonna be like, yeah, I guess that's how I'm gonna make my money. It's the only way I know how to make my money. So I want to do jobs for the New Republic. Now this is interesting. He seems to indicate specifically that like he wants the New Republic to send him out on jobs to take down Imperial remnants, right? Which of course is gonna, you know, put him in a direct collision course with Thrawn and that whole thing, which we know is coming in Ahsoka, right? So, okay, so he's gonna be working on taking out Imperials. All right, that's cool. And then he ends up taking an IG head. And he goes back to Navarro and they rebuild IG-11. So, you know, the IG-12 suit had gotten damaged in the fight. And IG-11 is there. And now he's the sheriff of Navarro because they needed a sheriff, remember? So, there you go. So, IG-11's back. And that suit thing that Grogu was wearing, that didn't last super long. He kind of used it for a little while to hold off the Praetorian guards. And then Grogu used the Force a lot to take them out. So, you know, Praetorian guards are dealt with. Moff Gideon is seemingly dealt with. The clones never came alive, which again, it's like I kind of hope that was a cool concept. Kind of hope that comes back, you know. And then yeah, they're on Navarro. They get a little house of their own. Grogu's playing outside. He's sitting on the porch, and they're just like, all right, in between adventures, you're gonna hang out on Navarro. You got your own little house. You know, so he's not going to live on Mandalore with the rest of the Mandalorians, I guess. I mean, he could always visit there whenever he wants, right? But they just told him, all right, go take Grogu out on your journeys, which it's very vague what that means. It just means adventures, I guess. So how long does that have to happen? Just until Grogu can talk, I guess, and then take the creed. So yeah, just it feels like this is an episode that's going to let a lot of people down. And you know, it's part of it definitely is those like fan theories that didn't end up coming true, which I don't think that's entirely fair to like put against the show because your specific theory didn't come true. But I will say there are other reasons to sort of be let down in that like there's a little bit of like, oh, okay, so you know, like nothing more dramatic happened, or there wasn't like a big cliffhanger, or there wasn't like, you know, like this just felt like a wrap up, and then that's it. Just see you next season, you know. So it's like, oh, we didn't get like a big moment, you know, like we didn't get like a big like, oh my god, this is gonna go viral everywhere. Everyone on Twitter is gonna be trending, and it's gonna be like this big thing. It just kind of like ended. You know, it's like, oh, okay, oh, all right, you know, so yeah, just look, there was no big cameos, which that's fine. There was no big death, which I was like, okay, well, that kind of it kind of like there a lot of the dramatic tension feels a little unfulfilled. You know, we got our big dramatic death last episode, but we didn't get one in the finale, so I was like, oh, all right. Everyone on Mandalore is chilling out. Everyone's cool. No one betrayed anybody. There's no infighting. The cult is still doing its cult thing, which some people are going to be upset about the cult, right? Like some people are entirely against the cult existing. They want the cult to be the bad guys of the show, but that's definitely not what the show's doing. The cult is not the bad guys. They're just other Mandalorians with their own belief system. Not everyone has to believe what they believe. There's clearly they're willing to live peacefully with other Mandalorians who don't believe that stuff, so the cult is fine, I guess. You know, and some people are gonna be really upset that the cult is fine, but that's just how it is, right? The cult's okay. Yeah, and then it's just like, all right, I guess Moff Gideon's defeated, and there's probably other, you know, I mean, we know there's a Shadow Council of Imperials out there. So I guess the interesting thing here is that, like, you know, we know season 4 has already been written, and it's just kind of like this, you know, it's like, where do we go from here? What is the show now? Because to be honest with you, the way that this ends feels like this could be the last season of The Mandalorian, and then you could just like You could just go tell the Ahsoka show and the big Dave Filoni movie and all that stuff, and then Mando could show up in those shows. But it does feel like this was a big like end point for his journey, right? Because like they got Grogu back at the beginning, you know, or in between seasons, right? And you stopped Moff Gideon seemingly once and for good, and you didn't have any indication that Moff Gideon's whole plan and his big scheme is gonna have any, you know, lingering effects at all. So everything seemed fine. You know, it's like at least on Mandalorian's run. I mean, I know Ahsoka is gonna deal with Thrawn, and that's probably gonna be a big movie where the Mandalorian does show up. But as far as the Mandalorian people and the planet of Mandalore and the Mythosaur is still there, the Darksaber's destroyed, but that doesn't seem to be a big point of contention. No one really seemed to care at all. I mean, I hope they fix it at some point because it was a cool sword and I liked seeing it. But again, it's like if no one brings it up and no one seems to really care that it was destroyed, then I guess it's fine, you know? So this was a weird season ending, you know? Like it definitely was like, it was a very peaceful conclusion, wrapped up everything really nicely. It didn't like have any threads lingering. It didn't have like a big, you know, like oh my god moment, you know. Like it was just kind of like, and then the good guys won, and everyone went home, and everything is fine. The end. So I don't know. I do feel like this is gonna, if people are not disappointed in the sense of like their specific fan theories didn't come true, I do feel like some people are going to be disappointed because there wasn't like a big moment, you know what I mean? Like the Mythosaur didn't come crashing through the Imperial base, like nothing like that happened, you know. It was just like there were some moments of tension where you thought a character might die, but you know, it's like when we go back and rewatch this season, it's like, well, we know no one dies, and we know everything's fine, and then, oh, okay. There's not like a moment that's going to be replayed all over and over again on social media, you know, like Luke Skywalker showing up, or IG-11 sacrificing himself. It's just, this one was very much like the peaceful ending, where it's like, everyone's happy, and everything's fine. So, you know, again, it was weird that the stuntman said that on social media. It feels like he was kind of hyping this up for like a big sad thing, and nothing sad happened. You know, I don't know. So I guess at the end here, what we're left with is Grogu has a new name, still no armor, still can't talk, and they have a house now. And then Mandalore is, you know, they fulfilled their mission as far as getting everyone on Mandalore together, and the Mandalorians living on there peacefully, right? So they did that, and Moff Gideon came back, and then he's gone now, and then his big plan was revealed, but then that's gone now, and then yeah, and there you go. So I don't know, guys, let me know what you thought about this season finale of Mandalorian. For me, it was definitely like a, oh, all right. I mean, a lot of the action was really cool. You know what I mean? But it definitely felt like I was still waiting for something to happen, and then nothing ever happened. And I was like, oh, I thought there was going to be like a big dramatic something, you know? It doesn't have to be a cameo. It doesn't have to be like a big reveal. But, you know, I was expecting someone to die, or I was expecting there to be like a in credits little stinger for like, it's not over yet, it's dun dun dun. It's like, no, it's just over. Oh. You know, which again is strange considering that we know season 4 is already written, and we know we're leading up to this big Thrawn thing. So for them to not, you know, and then you think back to Dave Filoni's comments of like, you know, like I guess he did indicate that like, oh yeah, you're gonna realize it feels like an ending, and I'm like, yeah, I am realizing that, aren't I? It does feel like it's over, but there's a season 4 being written already, so what's up with that? Why does it feel like an ending? Okay, anyways, let me know what you guys thought. I do feel like a lot of people are gonna be mad and angry, which I don't know, that feels like somewhat of an immature response to this. I'm more wondering like, what do we do now, you know, like, because we're kind of left without a whole lot of questions, as far as like the Moff Gideon side of things, because it feels like they wrapped it all up because they needed to answer questions and they needed to tie that loose end up, you know, and like that, and now it's just over. Now it's gone. So I'm more curious as to like what's going on than you know, I'm not like angry about it. So I know a lot of people out there are gonna be like, oh, they ruined the Mandalorian, blah, 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 you know. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.